It all started on a sunny afternoon in a little neighborhood called Sunny Pines. The sun was shining bright in the sky, making everything look happy and warm. The grass was green, the flowers were blooming, and the birds were chirping like they were having a party. Sunny Pines was a small place where everyone knew each other. Kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks, dogs barked at squirrels, and neighbors waved hello. It was the kind of place where nothing big or crazy usually happened. But this day? Oh, this day was going to be different. Really different. Meet Jake. Jake was just a regular guy. He wasn't super tall or super short. He wasn't super loud or super quiet. He was just Jake. He had brown hair that stuck up a little in the front, and he always wore a big smile. Jake lived in a little white house with a red door. It wasn't the fanciest house on the street, but it was his, and he loved it. He loved the way the sun peeked through his windows in the morning. He loved the little porch where he could sit with a glass of lemonade. And most of all, he loved his yard. Now, Jake's yard wasn't like everyone else's. Sure, he had grass and a few flowers, but what made his yard special was his collection of pink plastic flamingos. Yes, flamingos. Those silly, bright pink birds you stick in the ground. Jake had tons of them. He didn't just put them in boring rows like some people might. No way. Jake made them funny. He'd stick one flamingo upside down, like it was diving into the dirt. He'd put another one leaning against a tree, like it was taking a nap. Sometimes he'd even put little hats on them, tiny straw hats or baseball caps he found at the store. Every time Jake added a new flamingo, he'd laugh to himself and say, "There, that'll make someone smile today." And you know what? He was right. People loved those flamingos. Kids biking by would point and giggle. Old Mr. Thompson, who walked his dog every morning, would stop and chuckle. Even the mail lady, Ms. Carter, would shake her head and say, "Jake, you've got the silliest yard in Sunny Pines." Jake liked that. He didn't care about having the neatest grass or the fanciest flowers. He just wanted to make people happy, and his goofy flamingos did the trick. Well, almost everyone thought they were great. Almost. See, Jake thought this sunny afternoon would be like any other day. He woke up early, ate some cereal, and put on his favorite blue shirt. The sun was out, the air smelled like fresh cut grass, and everything felt peaceful. He grabbed his watering can, the dented one with a yellow handle, and headed outside. The flamingos were waiting for him, standing in their funny poses like little pink friends. Jake smiled as he watered his plants. The roses got a splash. The daisies got a sprinkle. And the flamingos? They just stood there, grinning in their goofy way. Perfect day, Jake said to himself. He waved at a couple of kids zooming by on their bikes. "Hey, Timmy." "Hey, Sarah," he called. They waved back, laughing as they sped down the street. Jake leaned against his fence, feeling happy. The sky was blue, the breeze was cool, and his flamingos were shining in the sun. What could go wrong? Nothing, right? It was just another chill day in Sunny Pines. Or so he thought. But here's the thing Jake didn't know, and trust me, it's a big thing. Trouble was waiting. Not far away. Not across town. Not even down the street. Trouble was brewing right next door. Yep, right next to Jake's little white house with the red door. And it wasn't just little trouble, like a lost dog or a broken sprinkler. This was wild trouble. The kind that makes your jaw drop and your eyes go wide. The kind that turns a quiet day into a big, crazy mess. And Jake? He had no idea it was coming. Let me tell you about next door. Next to Jake lived a lady named Karen. Karen wasn't like Jake. She didn't smile a lot. She didn't wave at kids or laugh at silly things. Karen was different. She had a big house with perfect grass and perfect bushes. Everything in her yard was straight and neat, like she measured it with a ruler. Her windows were always shiny, and her mailbox never had a speck of dirt on it. Karen liked rules. She liked things to be just right. And if they weren't, watch out. Karen had lived in Sunny Pines for years. She was part of something called the HOA. That's short for Homeowners Association. It's a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or what color your house can be painted. Most people in Sunny Pines didn't care much about the HOA. They'd nod and say, "Sure, whatever," and go on with their lives. But Karen? She loved the HOA. She carried the rulebook around like it was her favorite toy. She'd flip through the pages, looking for anything she could use to boss people around. No loud music, she'd say. No messy yards, she'd snap. Karen thought she was in charge of everyone. And Jake's flamingos? Oh, boy. Karen hated them. She didn't just dislike them a little. She really hated them. Every time she looked out her window and saw those pink birds, her face would turn red. She'd mutter to herself, "Those ugly things. They don't belong here." She thought they made the neighborhood look silly. She thought they broke the rules. And Karen? She didn't like anything that broke her rules. Jake didn't know it yet, but that sunny afternoon was the start of something big. He was out there, watering his plants, humming a little song. The kids on bikes were laughing. The flamingos were standing tall. Everything seemed fine. But over at Karen's house, something was happening. Something Jake couldn't see. Something no one else in Sunny Pines noticed either. Trouble was bubbling up, like a pot of water about to boil over. And it was all because of those silly flamingos. Let's rewind a little. That morning, before Jake even woke up, Karen was already mad. She'd looked out her window at 7 a.m. and saw Jake's yard. The flamingos were there, same as always. One had a tiny cowboy hat on. Another was tilted sideways, like it was dancing. Karen's eyes narrowed. "This has to stop," she said to herself. She grabbed her HOA rulebook off the kitchen table. It was a big, thick book with tiny writing. She flipped through it, her finger sliding down the pages. "No decorations that look bad," she read out loud. "Huh? That's it?" She slammed the book shut and smiled. Not a nice smile, though. It was a mean smile. The kind that says, "I'm going to win." Karen had been watching Jake's flamingos for weeks. Every day, they bugged her more. She'd tried talking to Jake once. Well, not really talking, more like yelling. A few days ago, she'd marched over to his fence. "Those birds are awful," she'd shouted. "Take them down." Jake just looked at her, surprised. "They're just for fun," he said. "They don't hurt anyone." But Karen didn't care. She'd stomped back to her house, muttering about rules and respect. And now, on this sunny afternoon, she was done waiting. She had a plan. Jake didn't know about her plan. He didn't know Karen was plotting. He was too busy enjoying his day. After watering his plants, he sat on his porch with a glass of water. The ice cubes clinked in the glass as he took a sip. He looked at his flamingos and grinned. "You guys are the best," he said, like they could hear him. The sun was high in the sky now, and the neighborhood was buzzing with little sounds: kids playing, a lawnmower humming, a dog barking down the street. It felt like the perfect day. But next door, Karen was pacing in her kitchen. She was wearing her usual outfit, a stiff white shirt and a frown. Her hair was pulled back tight, like it was mad at her head. She kept peeking out her window at Jake's yard. Every time she saw the flamingos, she got angrier. "He thinks he can ignore me," she said to herself. "He thinks those stupid birds are cute. Well, I'll show him." She grabbed her phone off the counter. Her fingers tapped the screen fast. She was calling someone. Someone important. But who? And why? Back outside, Jake had no clue. He finished his water and stood up. "Time to check the mail," he said. He walked down his little path, past the flamingos, and over to his mailbox. It was a rusty old thing, painted blue a long time ago. He opened it and pulled out a few envelopes, bills mostly. "Boring," he muttered. He glanced up and down the street. Everything looked normal. Mrs. Lopez was watering her flowers 2 houses down. A gray cat was napping on a porch. The kids on bikes were still zooming around. Jake shrugged and headed back to his house. But if Jake had looked a little closer, he might have noticed something strange. Across the street, parked under a big oak tree, was a car. It wasn't a car he'd seen before. It was dark gray, with tinted windows you couldn't see through. Inside that car, 2 people were sitting. They weren't talking or laughing. They were just watching. Watching Karen's house. Their eyes were sharp, like hawks waiting for a mouse. Jake didn't see them. He didn't think anything was weird. He just walked back to his porch, humming his little song again. The truth was, something big was about to happen. Something that would shake up Sunny Pines. Something that would make everyone talk for weeks. And it all started with Jake's flamingos. Those silly pink birds were about to cause a neighborhood war. Not a war with fighting or yelling, well, maybe some yelling, but a war of secrets and surprises. Jake didn't know it. Karen didn't know it either, not all of it. But trouble was coming, and it was going to be wild. So, what do you think? Can a few silly flamingos really cause all that? Can something as small as a plastic bird turn a quiet day into a big mess? Stick around, because this story's just getting started. Jake's chill afternoon is about to get flipped upside down. And Karen? She's about to learn that picking a fight with flamingos might not be her smartest move. Want to know what happens next? Keep reading, friends, this is going to be fun. Hey there, friends. My name is Jake Miller, and I'm just a regular guy who likes to have a little fun. A few months ago, I moved into a new house. It was in a quiet little neighborhood with green grass, big trees, and friendly people, or so I thought. I wanted to make my new home special, you know. My front yard looked boring. Plain grass, a mailbox, and nothing else. I said to myself, Jake, you've got to do something cool here. And that's when I got my big idea, pink flamingo lawn ornaments. Yup, those funny plastic birds you stick in the ground. They're bright, they're goofy, and they make people smile. At least, I thought they would. Oh boy, was I wrong about that. See, I went to the store one sunny day. I walked down the aisles, looking for something fun. Then I saw them rows and rows of pink flamingos with their long legs and silly faces. I grabbed a bunch of them, like 10 or maybe 12. I couldn't wait to get home and put them in my yard. When I got back, I ran outside with my flamingos. I stuck one in the ground near the mailbox. Then another by the steps. Then another near the bushes. Pretty soon, my yard was full of these bright pink birds, standing tall and proud. I stepped back, put my hands on my hips, and smiled. Perfect, I said out loud. This looks awesome. I thought everyone would love it. I mean, who doesn't like a little fun, right? I pictured my neighbors walking by, laughing, maybe even saying, "Hey, Jake, those flamingos are great." I imagined kids riding their bikes, pointing at my yard and giggling. I thought it'd be a happy thing for everyone. But not everybody was happy. Nope, not at all. There was one person watching me, and she didn't like my flamingos one bit. Her name? Karen Baxter. She lived right across the street from me, in a big white house with perfect flowers and a super clean lawn. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the boss of something called the HOA. That's the group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. And Karen? She loved rules more than anything. The first time I met Karen, I didn't even know she'd be trouble. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was outside watering my flamingos. Just kidding, I was watering the grass around them. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there she was. Karen had short hair, a clipboard in her hand, and a frown on her face. She looked at my flamingos like they were aliens from another planet. "Hi there," I said, trying to be friendly. "I'm Jake. Just moved in." She didn't smile back. She just stared at me, then at my flamingos, then back at me. "Those birds," she said, pointing at them with her pen. "What are they doing here?" I laughed a little. "They're decorations," I said. "I thought they'd make the yard fun." Karen didn't think it was funny. She wrote something on her clipboard real fast, like she was a teacher giving me a bad grade. "This neighborhood has rules, Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding you for talking in class. "I'll be watching you." Then she turned around and marched back to her house. I stood there, holding my water hose, thinking, what just happened? I didn't know it yet, but that was the start of something big. Those flamingos weren't just decorations anymore. They were about to start a war, a silly, crazy war with Karen Baxter, the rule-loving queen of the HOA. The next day, I went outside to check on my flamingos. They were still there, standing tall in the sunshine. I smiled at them, feeling proud. But then I looked across the street. Karen's curtains moved a little, like someone was peeking out. I couldn't see her face, but I knew it was her. She was watching me. Watching my flamingos. I waved at her window, just to be nice. The curtain snapped shut real fast. Weird, I thought. Does she really hate these birds that much? I didn't get it. They were just plastic toys, not monsters or anything scary. But to Karen, they were trouble. Big trouble. A few days later, I started noticing more stuff. Every morning, Karen would walk outside with her clipboard. She'd stand on her porch and stare at my yard. Sometimes she'd write things down. Sometimes she'd shake her head. One time, she even took a picture with her phone. I was sitting on my porch drinking lemonade when I saw her do it. Click. She snapped a photo of my flamingos, then hurried back inside. I scratched my head. What's her deal? I said to myself. I didn't know what she was planning, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Not one bit. My neighbors started talking about it too. One day, I was getting my mail when Mr. Tom, an old guy who lived next door, came over. He had a big smile and a baseball cap. "Hey, Jake," he said. "Those flamingos are pretty funny. I like 'em." I grinned. "Thanks, Mr. Tom. I thought they'd cheer things up." He nodded, then leaned closer. "Watch out for Karen, though," he whispered. "She's the HOA boss, and she doesn't like anything that breaks her rules." I laughed. "It's just some birds," I said. "What's the big deal?" Mr. Tom shrugged. "You'll see," he said, then walked away. I didn't know what he meant, but it made me wonder. Was Karen going to do something about my flamingos? The answer came sooner than I thought. It was a Saturday morning, nice and warm outside. I was eating breakfast cereal with milk when I heard a loud knock on my door. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped up, spilling a little milk on the table. "Who's that?" I said out loud. I walked to the door and opened it. Guess who was standing there? Yup, Karen Baxter. She had her clipboard in one hand and a big book in the other. The book had HOA rules written on it in big letters. Her face was all scrunched up, like she'd smelled something bad. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, but it didn't sound friendly at all. "We need to talk about those things in your yard." I looked at her, then at my flamingos, then back at her. "You mean my decorations?" I asked. She nodded fast. "Yes, those birds. They're against the rules. Section 12, paragraph 3 says no bright or silly decorations allowed." I blinked. "Silly?" I said. "They're just flamingos." Karen didn't care. She opened her book and pointed to a page. "See here," she said. "It says it plain as day. You need to take them down. Now." I crossed my arms. "No way," I said. "They're staying right where they are." Karen's eyes got big. "Excuse me," she said. I smiled real nice. "I like them, and they're not hurting anyone. So they stay." For a second, Karen didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her mouth open a little. Then she snapped her book shut. "Fine," she said. "You'll regret this, Mr. Miller." She turned around and stomped back to her house. I watched her go, feeling a little nervous but mostly annoyed. Regret it? I thought. What's she gonna do about some plastic birds? I had no idea what was coming. No idea at all. Those flamingos were about to turn my quiet little life upside down, and Karen Baxter was ready to fight. Here's a fun question for you: what would you do if someone told you to take down your favorite decorations? Would you fight back like me, or would you just do what they say? I decided to fight, and oh man, it led to some crazy stuff. Want to know what happened next? Stick around, because this story's just getting started. Karen had a plan, and my flamingos were in the middle of it. But there's a big surprise coming, one even I didn't see coming. Keep reading, friends, because you won't believe what happens next. Okay, so my flamingos were up in my yard, looking all pink and happy. I thought they were awesome, but Karen Baxter? She didn't just dislike them, she was mad. Like, really, really mad. I'm talking furious, like when you spill juice on your favorite shirt and can't fix it. Every single morning, I'd look out my window, and there she was. Karen, standing on her porch across the street, staring at my flamingos. Her lips were pressed tight together, like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just glared, her eyes squinting like she was trying to zap my birds with her brain. I'd sip my coffee and watch her back. What's her problem? I'd say to myself. I mean, they were just plastic birds. They weren't loud or messy. They didn't bark like a dog or eat her flowers. But Karen acted like they were the worst thing ever. One time, I even waved at her, just to see what she'd do. Big mistake. She turned her head so fast I thought it might spin off, then marched back inside her house. Slam. Her door shut loud enough for me to hear it from my porch. Okay, weird, I thought. She really hates these flamingos. Then, one day, things got wild. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was outside fixing one of my flamingos. Its leg had gotten a little wobbly, so I was pushing it deeper into the dirt. I heard footsteps stomp, stomp, stomp coming closer. I looked up, and there was Karen. She wasn't just walking over. She was marching, like a soldier on a mission. In her hand, she held her big HOA rule book, waving it back and forth like a flag. Her face was all scrunched up, and her eyes were locked on my flamingos. "Uh-oh," I said under my breath. I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. She stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the little lines on her forehead from frowning so much. "Jake Miller," she barked, loud and sharp. I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. "Hi, Karen," I said, trying to stay calm. She didn't say hi back. Instead, she pointed at my flamingos with her rulebook. "Those tacky birds violate Section 12, Paragraph 3, she yelled. Her voice was so loud I bet the whole street heard her. I blinked. "Tacky?" I said. "They're just fun decorations." She shook her head fast, like I'd said something crazy. "No," she snapped. "They're ugly, silly, and against the rules. Take them down." I looked at my flamingos, standing there all pink and proud. Then I looked back at Karen. Her face was getting red, like a big, angry tomato. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't going to let her boss me around either. So I smiled just a little one and said, "They're staying, Karen." Her eyes got huge, like saucers. "What?" she said, her voice squeaky now. "They're staying," I repeated, still smiling. "I like them, and they're not hurting anyone." For a second, she didn't move. She just stared at me, her mouth open a little, like she couldn't believe I'd said no to her. Then, oh boy, she lost it. Her face turned even redder than a fire truck. She waved her rulebook in the air like a crazy person. "You can't do this," she shouted. "The HOA has rules, and you have to follow them." I shrugged. "I don't see why some birds are a big deal," I said. That made her madder. She took a big step closer, so close I could smell her flowery perfume. "You'll see," she said, her voice low and sneaky now. "I'm going to teach you a lesson, Jake Miller." Then she turned around and stormed off, her shoes stomping on the sidewalk. Stomp, stomp, stomp. She muttered something under her breath, but I couldn't hear it all, just bits like lesson and rules and ridiculous. I stood there, watching her go back to her house. Slam. Her door shut again, loud as thunder. I scratched my head. "Teach me a lesson," I said out loud. "What's that supposed to mean?" I figured she'd just complain to the HOA board. You know, write a letter or call a meeting about my tacky birds. I thought that'd be the end of it. Maybe they'd send me a note saying, "Hey, Jake, take down the flamingos." I could ignore it, or maybe move one or two, and everything would be fine. That's what I thought. Oh, how wrong I was. So wrong. Something way bigger was coming, and I didn't have a clue. The next day, I woke up early. The sun was just peeking over the trees, and everything was quiet. I grabbed my cereal cornflakes with milk and sat by the window. I looked out at my flamingos. They were still there, looking happy in the morning light. "Good morning, birds," I said with a little laugh. Then I glanced across the street. Karen's curtains moved. Just a tiny bit, but I saw it. She was watching again. "Geez," I thought, Doesn't she ever stop? I took a big bite of cereal and kept eating, pretending I didn't notice her. But then something weird happened. A car drove by real slow. It was a white car with dark windows, and it stopped right in front of Karen's house. I couldn't see who was inside, but I saw Karen peek out her door. She looked left, then right, like she didn't want anyone to see her. Then she stepped outside and walked to the car. She leaned down and talked to whoever was inside. I couldn't hear what she said, but she looked sneaky. Her hands moved fast, pointing at my house, then at her rule book. The car window rolled up, and it drove away. Karen went back inside, quick as a bunny. What was that about? I wondered. My cereal was getting soggy, but I didn't care. I kept staring out the window, trying to figure it out. Was she telling someone about my flamingos? Maybe someone from the HOA? Or maybe a friend who didn't like my birds either. I didn't know, but it made me feel funny, like something big was brewing, like a storm getting ready to hit. I shook my head and finished my breakfast. It's fine, I told myself. She's just mad. Nothing's gonna happen. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Later that day, I went outside to mow my lawn. The grass was getting tall, and I didn't want Karen to have another reason to yell at me. I pushed my mower back and forth, making nice straight lines. The flamingos watched me, their little heads poking up above the grass. I smiled at them. You guys are worth it, I said. But then I heard a noise: click, click, click. I turned around, and there was Karen again. She was standing on her porch, holding her phone up. She was taking pictures of my yard. Click, click, click. I waved at her, just to be funny. Hey, Karen. I called. Want a flamingo for your yard too? She didn't laugh. She just glared, took one more picture, and went back inside. Okay, that's creepy, I thought. Why was she taking pictures? Was she going to show them to someone? Maybe put them in a big report about how bad my flamingos were? I didn't get it. I finished mowing and sat on my porch with a glass of water. The sun was hot, and I was sweaty, but my mind was racing. Karen wasn't giving up. She was planning something, I could feel it. But what? I figured she'd call the HOA, maybe get a few neighbors on her side. I didn't think it'd go any farther than that. I was wrong again. So wrong. The next morning, I saw her outside again. This time, she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, wearing a fancy suit and holding a notebook. They stood on her porch, looking at my yard. Karen pointed at my flamingos, talking fast. The man nodded and wrote stuff down. I watched from my window, my heart beating a little faster. Who's that guy? I thought. Is he from the HOA? Or someone else? They talked for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. Then the man got in a car and drove off. Karen went back inside, looking happy like she'd just won something. I didn't like that. Not one bit. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Mr. Tom. He picked up after 2 rings. Hey, Mr. Tom, I said. What's Karen up to? She's got some guy over, and they're looking at my flamingos. Mr. Tom laughed. Oh, Jake, he said. That's probably an HOA inspector. She's serious about those rules. I groaned. An inspector? For plastic birds? Mr. Tom laughed again. Yup. Karen doesn't mess around. Better watch out. I thanked him and hung up, feeling worried. An inspector? That sounded bad. Really bad. By now, I was starting to feel the tension. Karen wasn't just annoyed anymore, she was on a mission. She wanted my flamingos gone, and she was doing everything she could to make it happen. Pictures, phone calls, inspectors. What was next? I didn't know, but I could tell it wasn't over. Something bigger was coming, something I couldn't see yet. I looked out at my flamingos and sighed. You guys are causing a lot of trouble, I said. But I wasn't going to give up. No way. Karen could glare and yell all she wanted, but those birds were staying. At least, that's what I thought. Little did I know, the real storm was just around the corner. So, things were already tense with Karen and my flamingos. She was mad, I was stubborn, and my pink birds were still standing tall in my yard. But after that big showdown where she told me to take them down, stuff started getting weirder. Days went by, quiet days at first, but I could tell Karen wasn't done. Nope, not even close. She was up to something, and I was about to find out what. It all started slow, like little clues popping up here and there. I didn't know it yet, but those clues were leading to something wild. A couple days after our big talk, I noticed Karen acting funny. I was outside watering my grass one morning. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and my flamingos looked extra pink in the light. I glanced across the street, just out of habit, and there she was, Karen. But this time, she wasn't on her porch glaring like usual. She was sneaking around. I saw her peeking over my fence, her head popping up just above the wood. She had her phone in her hand, and click, she took a picture of my yard. I froze, holding the hose, water dripping onto my shoes. What's she doing? I thought. I decided to have a little fun. I waved at her, big and friendly, like nothing was wrong. Hey, Karen. I called out. Her head ducked down so fast it was like she disappeared. I heard her shoes scuffle on the ground, and then she was gone, scurrying back to her house. I laughed to myself. Okay, that was weird, I said out loud. My flamingos just stood there, quiet and still, like they didn't care. But I cared. Why was she sneaking around taking pictures? Was she building some kind of case against me? I didn't know, but it made me curious and a little nervous. The next day, it happened again. I was eating a peanut butter sandwich on my porch, enjoying the breeze. I looked up, and there she was, Karen, peeking over the fence again. Click. Another picture. This time, I didn't wave. I just watched her. She didn't see me at first, too busy with her phone. She took a few more pictures, click, 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 then looked up. Our eyes met. Her face went white, like she'd seen a ghost. Then she turned and ran back to her house, her flip-flops slapping the ground. Slam. Her door shut. I took a big bite of my sandwich and chewed slow. She's definitely up to something, I thought. But what? Things kept getting stranger. A few mornings later, I was out picking up sticks in my yard. A big wind had blown through the night before, and little branches were all over the place. I bent down to grab one, and when I stood up, I saw Karen again. This time, she wasn't at my fence. She was across the street, standing by her mailbox. She had a little notebook now, not just her phone. She was writing stuff down, looking at my flamingos the whole time. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Then she'd look up, squint at my yard, and write some more. I waved again, just to see what she'd do. She didn't run this time. She just glared at me, her lips tight, and kept writing. Okay, that's enough, I said to myself. I walked over to the edge of my yard, still holding a stick. Hey, Karen. I called. What are you writing about? She didn't answer. She snapped her notebook shut, turned around, and marched back inside. Slam. That door again. I shook my head and went back to picking up sticks. But now I was really wondering. Pictures, notebooks, what was she planning? It was like she was a detective, and my flamingos were the big crime. I didn't get it, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. A few days passed, and I started to relax a little. Maybe she'd given up, I thought. Maybe she took her pictures and wrote her notes and that was it. Wrong. One afternoon, I was inside watching TV. It was a sunny day, and I had my windows open to let in some fresh air. I heard a voice outside, loud and cranky. I turned off the TV and listened. It was Karen. She was in her driveway, pacing back and forth, talking on her phone. I couldn't see her from my couch, so I tiptoed to the window and peeked out. There she was, waving her arms around, yelling into her phone. Illegal decorations, she shouted. Yes, that's right. They're breaking the rules, and I need emergency action. I leaned closer, trying to hear more. Section 12, paragraph 3, she said. It's clear as day. I want something done about it now. She kept pacing, her flip-flops slapping the pavement. I couldn't hear the other person, but Karen was mad. I've got pictures, she yelled. I've got proof. This can't wait. Then she stopped pacing and listened for a second. "Good," she said, her voice quieter now. "Make it fast." She hung up and went back inside. I sat back down, my heart beating a little faster. "Emergency action," I said out loud. "Over flamingos." I laughed a little, because it sounded so silly. I mean, who calls plastic birds an emergency? But then I stopped laughing. Karen wasn't joking. She sounded serious, super serious. I looked out the window at my flamingos. They were still there, pink and happy, not bothering anyone. What's she gonna do? I wondered. I figured maybe she'd called the HOA again, or some fancy lawyer. I didn't think it'd get crazier than that. Oh boy, was I in for a surprise. The next day, I was outside raking leaves. It was a nice, cool afternoon, and I was humming a little song to myself. My flamingos were lined up in the yard, watching me work. I smiled at them. "You guys are the best," I said. Then I heard a sound that made me stop raking. Sirens. Wee-oh-oh, wee-oh-oh. I looked up, and my jaw dropped. A police car was coming down our street, its lights flashing red and blue. "No way," I said. My heart started pounding. The car slowed down and stopped right in front of my house. I dropped my rake and just stood there, staring. I thought, did Karen really do it? Did she call the cops on my flamingos? For a second, I pictured officers walking up to me, saying, "Sir, put down the rake. You're under arrest for illegal birds." It sounds funny now, but right then, I was freaked out. I took a deep breath and waited. The cop car doors opened, and 2 officers got out. They were big guys with sunglasses and serious faces. I waved a little, real nervous. Hi," I said. But here's the weird part, they didn't even look at me. Not once. They didn't look at my flamingos either. Instead, they turned around and walked straight toward Karen's house. "What?" I said out loud. I couldn't believe it. The cops weren't here for me, they were going to her place. I ran to my window and peeked out, trying to see what was happening. The officers knocked on Karen's door. Knock, knock, knock. I saw her curtains move, then her door opened a crack. I couldn't hear what they said, but Karen's face popped out, looking confused. She stepped outside, still holding her phone, and started talking to them. She pointed at my yard, waving her arms like she always did. "The flamingos." I heard her yell. "They're right there." But the cops didn't turn around. One of them pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to her. Karen stopped talking. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her mouth opened wide. She looked at the paper, then at the cops, then back at the paper. I couldn't see what it said, but it wasn't good for her. She shook her head fast, like she didn't believe it. The cops kept talking, calm and serious. I leaned closer to the window, my nose almost touching the glass. "What's going on?" I whispered. Something big was happening, something I didn't expect. I had to find out more, but I didn't know how yet. All I knew was this: Karen's plan, whatever it was, had just gone sideways. Okay, friends, this is where things get wild. Picture this: it's a sunny afternoon, and I'm standing on my porch. I've got a big mug of coffee in my hands, steam curling up from it. My flamingos are out in the yard, pink and proud, just chilling like always. Across the street, something crazy is about to happen. I'm watching it all unfold, my eyes wide, my heart beating fast. The police car is parked right there, lights flashing red and blue. 2 officers are standing at Karen's door, and I'm sipping my coffee, trying to figure out what's going on. This is the big moment, the one I didn't see coming. Let's back up a tiny bit so you know how we got here. Remember how Karen called 911 about my flamingos? I heard those sirens and thought, oh no, she's really done it now. I figured the cops were coming for me, ready to say, "Jake, those birds are against the law." But when they showed up, they didn't even look at my yard. Nope, they went straight to Karen's house. I was confused, but I wasn't about to miss this. So there I was, on my porch, coffee in hand, watching like it was the best show ever. The 2 officers stood tall at Karen's door. One had sunglasses and a clipboard. The other had a serious face and a little radio on his shoulder that buzzed now and then. They knock knock, knock, knock. The sound was loud, even from my porch. I took a sip of coffee and leaned forward, waiting. For a second, nothing happened. I saw Karen's curtains twitch, like she was peeking out. Then bam, her door flew open so fast it hit the wall. There she was, Karen Baxter, standing in her doorway with a big, smug smile. She looked like she'd just won a prize. She stepped outside, her flip-flops slapping the ground. Her hair was messy, like she'd been pacing around all day. In one hand, she held her phone. With the other, she pointed right at my flamingos. "There they are," she yelled, her voice high and squeaky. "Those tacky birds. Arrest him." She pointed at me now, her finger jabbing the air. I almost dropped my coffee. "Arrest me," I said out loud, even though no one could hear me. I looked at my flamingos, then back at Karen. She was so sure of herself, standing there with her chest puffed out, like she'd caught me doing something awful. I waited for the cops to turn around. I thought they'd march over to my porch and say, "Sir, put down the coffee. You're in trouble." My hands got sweaty just thinking about it. But here's the funny thing: they didn't move. Not one step toward me. The officer with the sunglasses just stood there, calm as can be. The other one, the serious guy, tilted his head a little, like he was confused. Karen kept pointing, her arm waving like a windmill. "Go get him," she screeched. "He's breaking the rules." Section 12, paragraph 3. She sounded like a broken record, saying that rule over and over. I took another sip of coffee, my eyes glued to the scene. The cops still didn't budge. Then the serious officer reached into his pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper, all folded up nice and neat. He held it up so Karen could see it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and steady, "we're not here for him." He nodded toward me, but he didn't even look my way. "We're here for you." For a second, everything went quiet. Even the birds stopped chirping. Karen's smug smile froze on her face. Her pointing hand dropped a little, like it forgot what to do. "What?" she said, her voice tiny now. I leaned forward so far I almost fell off my porch. "What did he say?" I whispered to myself. My coffee was getting cold, but I didn't care. This was too good. Karen's eyes got big, like two round marbles. Her mouth opened wide, and her jaw just hung there. She looked at the paper in the cop's hand, then at him, then back at the paper. "Me," she squeaked. "What do you mean, me?" The officer unfolded the paper and held it out. "This is a warrant," he said. "For you, Ms. Baxter." A warrant. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I knew it was bad. Really bad. Karen's face went white, like all the color drained out of it. She shook her head fast. "No, no, no," she said. "That's a mistake. I called you. I'm the one reporting a crime." She pointed at my flamingos again, her hand shaking now. "Those birds, they're illegal. Arrest him." The cop with the sunglasses shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "we're not here about the birds. This is about you." Karen blinked, like she couldn't believe her ears. "Me," she said again, softer this time. I set my coffee down on the porch railing, too excited to hold it anymore. What's going on? I thought. I had to know more. The serious cop started talking again. "Ms. Baxter," he said, "we've got reports about your house. You've been breaking some rules." Karen's mouth closed, then opened, then closed again, like a fish out of water. "Rules," she said. "What rules?" The cop looked at his paper. "You've been running a daycare in your garage," he said. "No license, no permission. That's against the law." My jaw dropped now. A daycare? In her garage? I looked at Karen's house, picturing it, little kids running around, toys all over the place, maybe a snack table with juice boxes. And she didn't even tell anyone? I couldn't believe it. Karen, the queen of rules, breaking the law herself? The cop kept going. "You've also got unpaid fines," he said. "Lots of them. The city's been trying to get you to pay for months." Karen shook her head harder. "That's not true," she yelled. "I follow the rules. I'm the HOA boss." The cop with the sunglasses stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said, "we've got proof." Neighbors complained. "We checked it out. It's all here." He tapped the paper. Karen grabbed it from his hand, her fingers shaking. She stared at it, her eyes moving fast over the words. Then she looked up, her face all twisted up. "This is a mistake," she said. "I didn't do anything wrong." But the cops didn't look like they believed her. The serious one crossed his arms. "You need to come with us," he said. I couldn't stop watching. Karen's smug smile was long gone. Now she looked scared, really scared. She took a step back, like she might run inside and lock the door. "No," she said. "You can't do this. I called you about him." She pointed at me again, her voice cracking. I waved from my porch, just a little wave, because I couldn't help it. The cop still didn't look at me. "Ma'am," the sunglasses cop said, "this isn't about him or his decorations. This is about you." Turns out, Karen had bigger problems than my flamingos. Way bigger. That warrant the paper the cop held was like a big uh-oh for her. She'd been dodging fines, hiding stuff, and breaking rules of her own. That daycare thing? Crazy. I never saw kids at her house, but maybe she kept it super secret. And the fines? I had no idea what they were for, maybe parking tickets or something, but she hadn't paid them. For months. While she was busy yelling about my birds, she was the one in trouble. My flamingos? They were nothing compared to this. Karen kept arguing. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "I'm a good neighbor. I keep this street perfect." The serious cop shook his head. "We've got evidence," he said. "You can't talk your way out of this." Karen's hands flew up to her head, like she was trying to hold her brain together. "Evidence," she said. "What evidence?" The sunglasses cop pulled out his clipboard. "Neighbors saw kids coming and going," he said. "They heard noise from your garage. Someone even took pictures." Pictures. Just like she took pictures of my flamingos. I almost laughed out loud. Karen's face went from white to red now, like a tomato again. "That's not fair," she yelled. "I was just helping some kids." The cop raised an eyebrow. "Without a license," he said. "That's illegal." Karen stomped her foot. "You're supposed to be after him," she said, pointing at me one last time. The cops ignored her pointing. "Time to go," the serious one said, stepping closer. I grabbed my coffee again, taking a big sip. It was cold now, but I didn't care. This was too good. Karen, the rule-loving HOA queen, was the real troublemaker. Not me. Not my flamingos. She'd called 911 to get me in trouble, but it backfired big time. The cops weren't here for my birds. They were here for her. That warrant proved it. She'd been hiding all this stuff, thinking she could boss everyone around, but now the truth was out. Karen looked at the cops, then at me, then back at the cops. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice all shaky. But they didn't listen. The serious cop took her arm, gentle but firm. "Let's go, ma'am," he said. Karen pulled back a little. "No," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." But the sunglasses cop stepped in too. "You don't have a choice," he said. And just like that, they started walking her to the car. I stood there, my coffee mug empty now, watching the big reveal. Karen's smug plan had fallen apart. My flamingos were safe, and she was the one in handcuffs. Well, not yet. They didn't cuff her right then, but I could tell she was done for. All her yelling about rules, all her sneaky pictures, all her phone calls, it didn't matter. She'd been caught. And me? I just watched, amazed, as the real story came out. My birds were the least of her worries now. Okay, friends, we're at the part where everything comes together. Picture this, Karen's big plan just blew up in her face. The cops weren't here for my flamingos, they were here for her. Her face went pale, like all the color ran away, as the two officers stood there with that warrant paper. I was still on my porch, my coffee mug empty now, watching it all happen. The chaos was over, and justice was about to roll in like a big, happy wave. Let's see how it all went down. So, there I was, standing by my front door. The police car was parked in the street, its lights still flashing red and blue. The two officers, one with sunglasses, one all serious, were talking to Karen. She'd been yelling about my flamingos, pointing at them like they were the worst thing ever. But now, she wasn't yelling anymore. Her hands were behind her back, and the serious cop was putting shiny silver handcuffs on her wrists. Click, click. The sound was loud, even from my porch. Karen's eyes got big, and she shook her head fast. No, 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 she said. This isn't right. I couldn't help it. I smiled a little. Not a mean smile, just a wow, this is wild smile. I walked over to my flamingos, those pink birds that started all this trouble, and leaned against one. It wobbled a bit under my arm, but it stayed up. I looked back at Karen. The cops were leading her to their car now. She didn't want to go. She kept pulling back, her flip-flops dragging on the ground. You've got the wrong person, she shouted. It's him you want. She tried to point at me, but with her hands cuffed, she couldn't. She just jerked her head my way instead. The sunglasses cop shook his head. Ma'am, he said, we told you. This isn't about him. It's about you and that daycare. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Daycare, she said, her voice all squeaky. That's nothing. I was just helping some kids. The serious cop kept walking her forward. No license, he said. No permission. That's the law. Karen's face scrunched up, like she was about to cry. But the flamingos, she said one last time. The cops didn't even look at my yard. They opened the car door, and in she went. I waved goodbye, just a little wave, with my hand barely moving. See ya, Karen, I said under my breath. The car door shut with a loud thud. I could see her through the window, sitting in the back seat. Her head was down now, her messy hair falling over her face. The cops got in the front, and the car started up. Vroom. The engine hummed, and those flashing lights spun around one more time. Then they drove off, slow at first, then faster, until they were gone around the corner. Karen was out of sight, and my street was quiet again. I stood there for a minute, looking at where the car had been. My flamingos were still here, tall and pink, like nothing had happened. I patted one on the head. You guys are safe now, I said, laughing a little. Then I turned around and saw something, curtains moving in the houses around me. Neighbors were peeking out their windows, watching the whole thing. I saw Mr. Tom, the old guy next door, standing by his mailbox. He had a big grin on his face. Mrs. Linda, down the street, was on her porch with her dog, whispering to it like it needed to know the news. Even little Timmy, the kid who rode his bike every day, stopped pedaling to stare. I waved at them all, big and friendly this time. Hey, everyone. I called. Show's over. Mr. Tom laughed and waved back. Good job, Jake, he shouted. Those flamingos won. I grinned. Yup. I said. They sure did. Mrs. Linda shook her head, but she was smiling too. Timmy just giggled and rode off. The street felt different now, like everyone knew something big had happened, and they were all on my side. Karen had been the bossy one, always telling people what to do, but now she was gone, and my flamingos were still standing. A few days later, I got a surprise in my mailbox. It wasn't a bill or a junk flyer, it was a letter from the HOA. I opened it up, a little nervous. What now? I thought. I pulled out the paper and read it. Dear Mr. Miller, it said. We've looked at your lawn decorations. The flamingos are fine by us. No rules broken. Thanks for being part of our neighborhood. I read it again, just to make sure. Fine by us. I said out loud. I couldn't believe it. After all Karen's fussing, the HOA said my birds could stay. I ran outside and looked at them. You hear that, guys? I said. You're official now. But here's the best part, guess who wasn't on the HOA board anymore? Yup, Karen. I found out from Mr. Tom a couple days later. He came over with a plate of cookies his wife made. Hey, Jake, he said, handing me the plate. Heard the news? I took a cookie, chocolate chip, my favorite, and said, what news? He leaned in, like it was a big secret. Karen's off the HOA, he whispered. They kicked her out after the cops came. My eyes got wide. Really? I said, munching the cookie. Yup, he said. She broke too many rules herself. No one wanted her in charge anymore. I laughed so hard I almost dropped the cookies. That's amazing, I said. Mr. Tom nodded. You and your flamingos shook things up, he said. Good for you. He patted my shoulder and went back home. I stood there, eating another cookie, thinking about it. Karen, the rule queen, was gone from the HOA. All because she got caught with that daycare and those fines. My flamingos didn't just win, they helped clean up the neighborhood. Word started spreading fast. The next day, Mrs. Linda stopped by with her dog, a little fluffy thing named Max. Jake, she said, is it true about Karen? I nodded. Yup, I said. She's not the boss anymore. Mrs. Linda smiled. Good, she said. She was always yelling at me about Max's barking. Maybe now we'll have some peace. Max barked, like he agreed, and we both laughed. Your flamingos are heroes, she said, then walked off with Max wagging his tail. Then Timmy came by on his bike. Hey, Jake, he shouted, skidding to a stop. Did the cops really take Karen away? I grinned. Yup, I said. She's in big trouble. His eyes got huge. Cool, he said. I like your birds. Then he pedaled away, yelling, Flamingo power. I waved after him, feeling pretty good. Everyone was talking about it, Karen's big fall and my flamingo's big win. The street felt happier, like a weight was gone. A week later, I heard more news. I was outside watering my grass when Mr. Tom called me over. Jake, he said, waving from his porch. Guess what? I turned off the hose and walked over. What? I said. He had that grin again. Karen moved away, he said. Packed up and left yesterday. My mouth dropped open. No way. I said. Yup, he said. Saw the moving truck myself. She's gone, too embarrassed to stay, I bet. I looked across the street at her house. The windows were dark, the porch empty. No more Karen glaring at me, no more clipboard, no more rules shouted over the fence. Wow, I said. She's really gone. Mr. Tom nodded. Yup. Your flamingos scared her off. We both laughed, and he went back inside. I walked back to my yard, looking at my birds. You guys are legends, I said. They just stood there, pink and quiet, like they knew it all along. My flamingos stayed right where they were, proud, goofy, and bright. Every day, I'd look at them and smile. They weren't just decorations anymore. They were a reminder, sometimes the people who yell the loudest, the ones who act like they're perfect, have the most to hide. Karen thought she could boss me around, but she was the one breaking rules. Now she was gone, and my birds were still here, shining in the sun. The neighborhood settled down after that. No more drama, no more sirens. Just quiet days and friendly waves from my neighbors. My flamingos became a little famous, people even stopped by to take pictures with them. One lady said, I heard about the HOA lady. These birds are awesome. I just nodded and said, thanks. It felt good. Real good. Justice was served, and my flamingos got the last laugh. Hey there, friends. We've made it to the end of this wild story, my flamingos versus Karen, the nosy HOA queen. What a ride, right? Those silly pink birds turned everything upside down, and Karen, who thought she was so perfect, ended up in big trouble. It's funny how things work out sometimes. So let's sit back, take a deep breath, and talk about what happened. This isn't just a story about flamingos, it's a story about people, surprises, and sticking up for yourself. Ready? Here we go. First, let's think about how it all ended. My flamingos are still in my yard, standing tall and bright. Karen. She's gone, moved away after the cops took her off in that flashing car. She tried so hard to ruin my fun, pointing at my birds and calling them tacky. She even dialed 911, thinking she'd win. But guess what? The ones who judge you the hardest, the ones who act like they're better than everyone, might be hiding something big. Karen was. She had that secret daycare in her garage and those unpaid fines. She yelled loud about rules, but she was breaking them herself. Funny, isn't it? I remember standing on my porch that day, watching her leave. The street was quiet after the police car drove away. My neighbors peeked out, whispering to each other, and I just leaned against my flamingos. They didn't say anything, they're plastic, after all, but they felt like little buddies who'd stuck with me through it all. I looked at them and thought, wow, you guys did it? You turned the tables on her. That's what this story's about. Sometimes the silliest things, like a bunch of pink birds, can show who's really right and who's really wrong. Let's talk about Karen for a minute. She seemed so bossy, didn't she? Always on her porch, glaring at me, waving that rulebook like it was a magic wand. She thought she could tell me what to do, like she owned the whole neighborhood. But behind her big talk, she was falling apart. That daycare thing? Crazy. I picture her garage now, little kids running around, maybe spilling juice on the floor, while she told them to be quiet so no one would find out. And those fines, she ignored them for months, acting like they didn't matter. She judged me for my flamingos, but she was the one with the real mess. It makes me think about people in general. Have you ever met someone who's super loud about what's wrong with you? Maybe a kid at school who says your shirt's dumb or your lunch looks weird. I bet you have. I know I have. When I was little, there was this boy named Tommy in my class. He'd always tease me about my sneakers. They were bright green, and I loved them. Those are ugly, he'd say, laughing like he was so cool. But one day, I saw him trip over his own shoelaces because his fancy shoes were too big. He wasn't so perfect after all. It's like that with Karen. The loudest ones, the judgy ones, might be tripping over their own messes. So here's a big lesson: don't let those people stop you from being you. I could have taken my flamingos down when Karen got mad. I could have said, okay, fine, I'll make her happy. But I didn't. I kept them up because they made me smile. They were my fun idea, my little way to make my yard special. And in the end, they stayed, and she left. That feels good, doesn't it? Next time someone tries to ruin your fun, maybe they don't like your drawing or your favorite game, just keep going. Be you. Because you never know, they might be the ones running from trouble, not you. Let's imagine something for a second. What if I'd listened to Karen that first day? She came over, waving her rulebook, saying, take those tacky birds down. I could have pulled them out of the ground, stuffed them in my garage, and let my yard go back to boring. No pink, no goofy, just plain grass. Karen would have smirked and walked away, thinking she'd won. But then what? She'd still have her secret daycare. She'd still owe those fines. The cops would have come for her anyway, and I'd be sitting there with no flamingos and no story. I'm glad I didn't give in. My birds made this adventure happen, and they showed me something cool: standing up for what you like can lead to big wins. Now, think about your own life. Have you ever had a win like this? Maybe not with flamingos or cops, but something small that felt big to you. I'll tell you another quick story from when I was a kid. I loved building forts out of blankets in my room. I'd use chairs, pillows, everything I could find. My big sister, Ellie, hated it. That's messy, she'd yell. Take it down. One day, she told Mom, hoping I'd get in trouble. But Mom came in, looked at my fort, and said, wow, Jake, that's awesome. Leave it up. Ellie's jaw dropped, just like Karen's did. I kept my fort, and Ellie stopped bugging me. It's not cops and handcuffs, but it felt like a win to me. What about you? Ever had a moment where you stuck with something and came out on top? Tell me below, I'd love to hear it. This whole flamingo mess got me thinking about other stuff too. Like how quiet can be strong. My birds didn't talk back to Karen. They didn't yell or fight. They just stood there, being themselves, while she made all the noise. And in the end, they won without saying a word. Sometimes, you don't have to shout to show you're right. You just keep doing your thing, and the truth comes out. Karen was loud, but she fell. My flamingos were quiet, but they stayed. That's pretty cool, huh? I've got one more little picture for you. Imagine my yard now. The sun's shining, the grass is green, and my flamingos are all lined up, happy as can be. No one's glaring at them anymore. No one's taking pictures or calling the cops. Neighbors walk by and wave, Some even stopped to say, "Love those birds, Jake. It's peaceful, like the storm's over." And across the street, Karen's house is empty, her porch bare. She thought she'd ruin my fun, but she's the one who had to run. It's like a big HOA, to anyone who tries to push you down. So here's my message to you, friends, keep being you. If you like silly stuff like flamingos or green sneakers or blanket forts, don't let anyone take that away. The Karens of the world might huff and puff, but they don't always win. Sometimes they're the ones hiding secrets, and sometimes they're the ones who trip over their own feet. You've got the power to stand tall, just like my birds did. Even when someone's mad, even when they're loud, keep doing what makes you happy. You might be surprised how it turns out. Let's wrap this up with a fun question: what's your flamingo? What's that thing you love, even if someone else doesn't get it? Maybe it's a toy, a game, or something you made. Whatever it is, hold on to it. Tell me about it below, I want to know. And if you liked this story, stick around. I've got more tales to share, full of twists and laughs. For now, I'm heading outside to give my flamingos a little pat. They earned it, don't you think? See you next time, friends. Keep being awesome.